Hello there, YouTube. This is Brownie again from the Young Zings, and today I have a very special video for you all today. Today I am presenting the top 10 decks for the November/December format. Basically, the time frame that we're looking at is between now and December 31st, but in actuality, it's just between now and Breakers of Shadow in January, assuming that there's no list that comes to an effect in New Year's. Without further ado, let's go ahead and move on to the top 10. At number 10, we're going to be having the Madolche. The Madolche is a very strong deck that has received a lot of popularity lately from the likes of people like Noah Green, the winner of the North American World Championship qualifier. The main strategy that's been hyped up a lot lately is the Gem Knight Madolche combo. Essentially, you open up Madolche Magdalene and a Gem Knight fusion, and you're able to go +5 and put down 13,000 points of damage on the board very, very easily. This deck has a very strong Cosmo matchup thanks to Madolche Queen Tiaramusu and gobbles up rogue decks very, very easily. One of the problems though with this deck is that it does lose very easily to disruption, such as hand traps like Effect Veiler and Max C, but also just general back row decks such as Burning Abyss or Stellar Knight. Regardless, these lovely pastries have earned their number 10 on the list. Moving on down to number 9 is going to be the Hero deck, or the Elemental Hero deck. Probably the best anti-meta deck of this entire list. Their only hit in the last list was Reinforcement of the Army down to 1. But they can easily swap that with Emergency Call, so that hit really doesn't do much to stop this deck. Master of Dark continues to be incredibly powerful against pretty much most of the meta. It discourages searching, and pretty much locks off the graveyard for most decks, which a lot of decks need, and even Pendulum monsters, when they would be sent to the extra deck, they're banished instead, which, again, I'll never really understand that, but regardless, I believe that this deck, solely because of Dark Law, is going to be pretty good as an anti-meta. It just kind of lacks the power of most other decks that are going to be farther up in the list, so only number 9 for the Heroes. At number 8 on our list, we're going to be having the Infernoid. The Infernoid is a very resilient and potent deck against a good amount of the meta. Infernoid Decatron gives the deck a great deal of needed consistency, and is also a 1-card out to a great deal of boards. Infernoid Deviati also gives the deck a lot of power against back row and pendulum decks due to its ability to Harpy Feather Duster your opponent's field. And Infernoids gobble up slower decks like Stellar Knights that rely heavily on the graveyard. Some of the problems with Infernoids, though, is that they struggle with OTK strategies. Regardless, these mighty fiends from hell have earned a decent chance this upcoming format. Number 7, the psy-frame. This deck was actually pretty surprising when it came out of the woods here in the TCG. It was largely dormant in the OCG due to the dominance of Performance Powers completely overshadowing this deck. That's why we were all pretty surprised when it actually was really pretty good. This deck's main power derives from psy-frame Overload, which was pretty much able to lessen the gap between this deck and other decks. Essentially, psy-frame Overload is a once per turn, you can target one card on the field and banish it face down. That's right, you can banish any card on the field face down once per turn. Did I mention that was once per turn? Aside from that lovely card, there's also psy-frame Lord Omega, which has received also a lot of hype, which is actually a solid $30, driving up this deck's price. Psy-frame Lord Omega is a pretty good beater. This deck is able to get himself off the field so that you can use your psy-frame negation cards a little bit more. You can use them multiple times per turn now. Thanks to psy-frame Circuit, you can negate something, make a synchro monster such as Zeta or Omega, and then get it off the field to negate something else. So essentially, Overload plus Omega plus Circuit gives this deck a solid number 7. Unfortunately, this deck is kind of so reactive that it can only go so high up in the list, because decks typically just like to deck it out. Moving down to number 6, we're going to be having the Stellar Knight. The Stellar Knight still remain a very, very powerful deck, even though they won Worlds. This is the first deck I've ever seen that it was able to win Worlds and survive the list that was immediately after that. The only hit that they had to them in the last list was Reinforcement of the Army to 1. This does little to stop the deck. Resolving Stellar Knight Trevor is still very hard to come back from, especially when you bounce back those dead finishes and call the Haunteds. I feel like this deck struggles a lot against Infernoid and a lot of OTK strategies, particularly Pendulum decks. We think that this is a relatively consistent deck with a good amount of power thanks to Trevor, and it's definitely going to be a decent number 6. Number 5, the Burning Abyss. Burning Abyss got probably hit a little more than some of the other decks on this list, but the deck is still very, very powerful. It's just not as resilient as before. I believe that Burning Abyss decks need to capitalize on Firelink of the Burning Abyss and Traveler of the Burning Abyss in order to remain relevant. Resolving Firelink against a Pendulum deck still spells disaster for pretty much all those lovely Pendulum decks out there. However, this TCG exclusive archetype has a lot of difficulty against the other TCG exclusive archetype, the Cosmo. This deck has a lot of trouble dealing with monsters that cannot be targeted, and unfortunately, Cosmos can throw those down very, very easily. Regardless, this deck's immense power against Pendulum decks definitely makes it a good number 5. Floating into number 4 will be the Xing. The Xing is very good against most of the decks on the upper part of this list due to the main 2 variants that are the most popular. The first is going to be the Zephyr Xing variant, which is more of a proactive and a more aggressive version that focuses on the Zephyr pendulums, but it's still very, very good at dropping 3 Boxias to shuffle away your opponent's board 3 times. There's also the lose 1 turn variant of Xing, which is able to withstand many floodgates, such as Mistake, Anti-Spell Fragrance, lose 1 turn, and Skill Drain. Unfortunately, along with these perks, the deck does have difficulty against decks that can throw down rank 4s very, very easily. The very existence of Abyss Dweller kind of shoves this deck down a few points, but we still think it's going to be very, very good this upcoming format. 7 down and 3 more to go. The final 3 decks, the best 3 decks of this format. The number 3 deck on the top 10 list is going to be the Cosmo, the latest TCG exclusive archetype that debuted on Clash of Rebellions. This deck received a lot of great support in Dimension of Chaos in the form of Cosmo Dark Destroyer and Cosmo Wicked Witch that vastly improved the deck. They now have a non-targeting +1 beater that floats into a non-targeting life point gaining beater that floats into a +1 spell trap killing ship that floats into an unkillable 1900 beater. Wow, that's a lot. Aside from that little thing though, they have some various consistency issues in the fact that they have to run a lot of high-level monsters that can only be summoned with the Girls or Strawman. Cosmo Town can only stop so much of that. The deck will also have a little bit of trouble against various Pendulum decks due to the existence of Odd-Eyes Meteor Burst Dragon and Ignister Prominence, the Cosmo Draco Slayer, who is able to get rid of the ships very easily by not targeting them. These Pendulum decks can bust that guy out very easily. Another kind of rough part about Cosmo is the great emphasis the deck has on its normal summon. Making the deck somewhat more linear, it is sometimes unable to deal with decks that can do a lot more things out of their own normal summon. The deck is a very good matchup against a lot of the decks on the lower part of this list, barring Xing, but it's going to have a little bit of trouble against the decks that are in the next 2 slots, making it number 3. Now we're moving on to the number 2 deck, the Magister. This deck is actually my least favorite of all of these decks on this list. This deck actually makes me vomit. It reminds me a lot of Clifford, mainly in the fact that all of the monster effects are unnecessarily absurd. Literally all the monsters in this archetype have the same effect, where none of them can be targeted or destroyed by card effects, which makes them immune to pretty much like 99% of the cards in the game. Pretty much, if you don't like Klee, or you didn't like Klee, you won't like Magister. This deck is very good at controlling your opponent due to the plethora of spell and trap card support that it has, each one of them doing their own unique little thing. They all target, it's really nice, and really good at grabbing them. The deck's kind of hard to stop once it really gets going. The pure variant is the most successful variant right now, and actually, it's pretty much the only variant. But in December, it will likely evolve into Magician Magister, basically using the Magician Pendulum monsters from the structure deck, and kind of driving the Magister monsters in kind of a more consistent way to really get you through. This deck is certainly going to be one of the best decks moving into 2016 just because of its immense resilience. And really, if you can't get rid of them early, they're going to be really, really hard to deal with later down the line. And finally, the number 1 deck. And if you have been following me for a while, or have been listening for the past few minutes, which, we sincerely appreciate that, you can go ahead and probably guess what that is. The number one deck for the November/December format is the Pendulum Magician deck. This deck, coming mainly out of a $10 structure deck in December, was very dominant in the OCG before it evolved into MM, or the Perform Agent Pal. Not only is this deck very consistent thanks to Pendulum Call and Performer Pal Scroll Combat Joker, but the fact that Insight Magician, or Wisdom Eye Magician, his TCG name, the fact that he's being imported in this structure deck, that's such an immense deal that it looks like that's going to be enough to make the deck number one moving into next year. This deck is able to throw down very high-level monsters with a lot of attack at a very consistent rate, and has access to a very powerful set of extra deck monsters, mainly in the form of rank 4s and rank 7s, as well as Ignister Prominence, the blasting Cosmo Draco Slayer. Cosmo Draco Slayer, he destroys Cosmos. Also, Odd-Eyes Meteor Burst Dragon. Both of these are really good checks against decks like Xing, Burning Abyss, and Cosmo. But also, with just the immense power in this deck, they can just completely steamroll a lot of the decks in the lower part of this list. The best variant right now looks to be the Odd-Eyes Magician variant, but it could easily evolve into the infamous Perform Agent Pal deck should the release of Performer Pal Pendulum Sorcerer as an OCG import in something like Breakers of Shadow be announced. All in all, this deck's crazy power easily makes it the best deck for this format. That is going to do it from here. That is the top 10 decks of the November/December format, of course, in our opinion. We'd love to hear your guys' opinion. Do you agree with this list? Do you like the way it's structured? Did you want some other deck on there, or do you want to kick some deck out? I know Madolche was kind of a throw-in, but actually we think that deck's pretty good. It's I've actually been really enjoyed playing with that deck. Of course, let us know what you guys think. As always, like, comment, and subscribe for more top 10s, discussions, deck profiles, and all that jazz. And I will see you all next time.